Now it's time. Our first speaker, Ira Trivedi, an Indian novelist, yoga teacher, and an entrepreneur. She has written for many publications like the Times of India, Hindu, Forbes, The Telegraph, and Cosmopolitan. And her talk today is called Marriage is the Question. Can I have a round of applause for Ira Trivedi, please?
Thank you very much, everyone here, for having me. And once again, I really want to thank the organizing core committee. They have been so cooperative, so patient with all of us, and through email, through the past many months. So can we please give them all a big hand of applause? This is really very, very difficult to do. I know I was there not so long ago myself in the middle of exams and classes and all of that stuff to come together and to do all of this. It may seem kind of simple to put together 6 speakers, but in actuality, this kind of event takes months and months and months. So thank you, all of you, for putting this together and for having all of us. Thank you. Now, you guys can see all these screens clearly, right? Okay. Now, when they told me that the topic of TEDx is the question is the answer, I asked myself, what is the question? And then I thought to myself about, popping the question. And popping the question, what is the first thing that comes to mind when a girl thinks of, he just popped the question, was marriage. So I said, let me talk about marriage. And then let me talk about the marriage question. For centuries and centuries, if we look at our ancient history, if we look at our mythology, what we see is that arranged marriage was part of our landscape. Whether you look at Ram and Sita, whether you look at Zeus and Hera, whether you look at Jodha Akbar, it was arranged marriage that formed part of the narrative, not anything else. It was never love marriage, and even if there was love marriage, it would happen very quickly, and then they would immediately get married. There was no sort of courtship period, there was no live-in relationships, definitely, and there was no long periods of dating. But in 2015, India has a very different landscape, and I don't think that any love story of 2015 is going to be about arranged marriage. So when humankind looks back at this time, when they read the books, see the videos, watch the movies, the paradigm of the love story is not going to be about arranged marriage. So what I noticed as I read my book, as I continued, when I researched India and love, this took me about 5 years. I traveled to 12 cities and I interviewed 600 people, is that all of that has changed. The entire concept of arranged marriage was breaking down and evolving wherever I went. And it wasn't that marriage had completely gone through the roof. That wasn't the case. It's just that the century-old construct of arranged marriage, the construct that has held together our societies and which has really been the fabric of Indian culture, has for the first time today absolutely dissolved. Young India does not want arranged marriages. That was absolutely clear to me as I traveled from state to state and spoke to people. All of them said that we want to get to know the partner that we want to marry. We want to fall in love. We want to have chemistry. And this is what we want. We don't want that old sort of construct happening anymore in which, ladke ko ek baar dekh liya, shaadi ho gayi. And that got me thinking. I began wondering what exactly is happening with marriage and how has it changed and how will it affect our future? So let me first talk a little bit about my family. I think that's always a good place to start, at your own personal history. Now, my great-grandparents got married at the age of 15 and 16. They were in a village in Uttar Pradesh. They never met each other, and they just got married. My grandparents saw the photographs, at least, of each other, because by that time there was photography, but they met each other for the first time at the mandap. My parents saw the photographs of each other, and they met with all of their families involved, and then they even went for a date together before they got married. But the date consisted of going for a movie at 10 a.m. in the morning and being escorted with all their cousins. And for my sister who got married 12 years ago, she got married in an arranged marriage. She met her husband who was from the same caste, the same community. They got to know each other. They had a period of courtship which was under supervision, and then they got married. 2 years ago, my younger sister got married. It was a love marriage. She met her husband, like many young people do today, at her workplace. They got married, and there was absolutely there was no problem from either side, and they got happily married. As for me, even just 3 years later, the paradigm has shifted so much that my parents say, listen, beta koi problem nahi, tum kisi se bhi shaadi kar lo. You know, he can be Indian, non-Indian, anything. So you can see that even over the course of my own family, over the generations, there has been such evolution, and only in the past 12 years there has been so much change. But this is not just representative of my family. This is what's happening throughout India, as I observe from my book. But before I go into what is happening in India, I want to give you guys the brief history of marriage in the rest of the world. Now, this concept of love marriage has only actually been alive for the past 100 years. Before that, for centuries and centuries and centuries, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of societies, marriage has been all about societal responsibility, not about individuals. So everyone got married because the church told them so, because it was a good economic arrangement, because it was a good social arrangement. That's how marriages were done, just like they are done in India today, around many parts of India. This is how it was done in England, in Europe, and then in America. And a lot of the reasons for marriage were economic. It was simply because a man could not do what a woman did, and a woman could not do what a man did. So a woman would stay at home, she would cook, she would clean, she would take care of the children, and the husband would go to work, he would make a livelihood and come back to his family. So the roles were very, very separated. And then things started changing. Women became working. Young people moved out of their family homes and they moved to the big cities to find employment and to find work. And over time, gender roles became more blurred. So women were doing what men were doing, and men were doing what women were doing. No one even really needed each other. So men didn't need someone to cook for them. They now had a microwave oven. They would put a meal in the microwave and out would come their dinner. Women too didn't need men to survive. They would go into the workplace, earn their own living, and that's how the concept of arranged marriage broke down slowly over time, over the decades in the West. And so today, in America, the concept of arranged marriage is an absolutely archaic one, as it is all over Europe. So the big question is, what is happening in India, and how is it different than what happened in the West? So in India, it's a very interesting scenario because so many things are happening, and they're all happening at cyber speed. Now, I have, of course, written an entire book about this, but I thought for today, let me carve out the 5 top reasons why arranged marriage is breaking down in India, and why the scenario in India is going to be closer to the West than it has ever been before. So the first reason is the breakdown of caste. So Indian society, as we all know, was fundamentally formed on a system of caste, which was a division of labor. So the Brahmins were, as we know, they were the minds of the society. The Rajputs were the warriors, the Banyas were the traders, and then we had a lower caste which would do all the sort of menial labor that was required. But as Indian society has modernized, caste too is slowly going through the windows, and we see this through matrimonials. So earlier we would see all the matrimonials divided up by Agarwal and by Brahmin and this and that. But now when you look at even matrimonials, many of them are going to be saying engineer and doctor and MBA. So all of you guys would be in the MBA section, okay? So this is how it was divided. But it's slowly caste, which was held together by marriage, is breaking down. So if caste doesn't need marriage anymore, marriage also is not really being based on caste. The second is women in the workplace. So what's happening in India is very interesting. For the first time in the history of India, women are joining the workforce in large numbers. So many young women are going to the office, and this is not a social taboo, and this is only increasing more and more so. The third thing is the emergence of large institutions. So the emergence of large institutions like IMT, where we are today, the emergence of corporations and schools, has really blurred gender lines. So no longer are men and women segregated. Men and women come together and are treated as equals. And the thought that men and women are fundamentally different is also changing. Because as women progress and as men progress in their social thinking, in the way they're constructing gender roles in their mind, they're realizing that all of us stand on a common platform. The fourth is rural to urban migration. So over the course of this talk that I'm giving, 2,000 villagers would have moved into the city. As India is urbanizing, and as people are moving from rural to urban, social constructs are being broken down. So no longer do people have to think, what's our society and what's our community going to think if we marry against what is always against social norms. So people care less and less about these very, very age-old social constructs. So when a young man moves from the village to the city, he now has the freedom to do what he really wants to do and marry who he really wants to marry. The last is technology, and this is actually what has resulted in the breakdown of marriage happening at cyber speed. So while in the West it took many decades for it to break down, maybe even an entire century, in India it's happened actually in the course of a decade. So there are still physical barriers that keep men and women apart, but things like WhatsApp, Instagram, email, Skype, video chat, SMS, all of this stuff has broken down the physical barriers. So a man and a woman can fall in love without actually even seeing each other because that communication has evolved. So letters, love letters, that's completely gone. Now it's Snapchat, I think. Not really love letters so much anymore. So all of this is really helping and speeding up the breakdown of arranged marriage. Now let me ask you guys, and this puts up a very interesting question. How many of you guys want an arranged marriage? How many of you guys want a love marriage? Okay, what about the rest of you guys who haven't raised your hand in either? Does that mean that you just don't want to get married? Okay. How many of your parents want you to get arranged marriages? Okay, and how many of them want you to guys to get love marriages? Okay, so there are very few people whose parents want them to get love marriages. Now the big question, how many of you would get love marriages even if your parents want you to get arranged marriages? And how many of you would fight for it? Yeah, that's a fair number of people, exactly proving my point. Now, this is not just happening within you guys, within this group of people. This is happening actually across India. But because as there's change, there will also be conflict. We have seen this with world wars that have been fought. As countries and societies went through big economic changes, big geographic changes, big socioeconomic changes, entire wars were waged. And in India too, there's an inherent backlash against this. And I think when many of you fall in love, and as many of you go on to your families and say, this is the decisions that I want to take, you will probably face some of that conflict in your own personal life. Now, this is also happening on a very large level. And we have, for example, love suicides. Indian youth is killing itself in the highest numbers in the world. Youth suicides in India are the largest in the world. And the number one reason for youth suicide is actually something called love suicides. When people not able to deal with their love affairs and not being able to deal with their conflicts actually kill themselves. Second is honor killings. Now for those of you who don't know what honor killings means, honor killing is when people actually murder young couples because of their honor. India being a deeply patriarchal society, it's when young men, especially when it comes to women, because 90% of honor killings are actually conducted by the girl's family, a family feels like they lose honor when the women of their family make their own decisions regarding their love lives and their personal lives. So it's a malady of a patriarchal society, and as India evolves to a less and less patriarchal society, honor killings are actually becoming far worse. So it is a disease of a modernizing India, and an India that's slowly moving into a more modern mindset when it comes to relationships. The third is stress. The Lancet Journal just came out with a survey saying that Indian women are the most stressed in the world. And this stress is largely from the age groups of 18 to 30. As I wrote my book and I interviewed hundreds of psychologists around the country, the number one thing that I heard was what I was very concerned about, is a large number of young people who were visiting psychologists and psychoanalysts because of the huge amount of stress that they had to incur. And a big reason of the stress was their personal lives. Because this, for many young people, this is happening for the first time. Their parents never had love marriages. Their grandparents certainly never had love marriages. So this was for the first. So as young Indian people fell in love for the first time, who did they have to go to for guidance? They couldn't go to their families. They couldn't really go to many of their friends and their peers because they were going through the same struggles. So we're in a very interesting scenario, and these three factors actually are quite they're quite disappointing, and they're quite disparaging factors. So now, what will an India of the future look like? And that is a question that when I thought through this entire talk, that's what I was left with. My personal hope is that an India of the future will look more like an India of the ancient past than an India of the today. An India of an ancient past was actually celebrated love, where Kama was one of the